UPS, who is the Director of Maintenance and Engineering and Sustainability and Government Affairs at United Parcel Service. Next slide, a little bit. So just a little bit about Clean Cities, Georgia, and we're happy to be supportive of this RNG forum, bringing this together. But Clean Cities, Georgia, we're here in Atlanta. We've been around for over 25 years, and we are a convener of Georgia stakeholders interested in alternative fuel. We are funded by the Department of Energy, plus other grants that we manage, and we help to bring technology companies together, end users together, trying to put together some winning federal grant programs and maximize state funding to help roll out these types of alternative fuel programs for the transportation industry. Next slide. So I'll take your attention to the far right, alternative and renewable fuels and infrastructure. That's what we're going to talk about today. Of course, the renewable natural gas, it can be used in light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, and it can obviously improve fuel economy. And so there's a whole a network of benefits from renewable natural gas that you'll get to hear about today. Next slide. Just a little bit about Clean Cities, Georgia, the team. We've got a great group of board of directors that help guide me as executive director. And all of them are involved in some form or fashion in clean alternative fuel transportation. So love the fact that we've got broad support throughout Georgia when it comes to alternative fuels, and smart people to help advise us as we move forward, adopting more of the alternative fuels for transportation. Next slide. And I'll turn this over to Robin as the Renewable Gas Director for Southern Gas Company. Robin.
Thank you so much, Frank, and good morning. The Natural Gas Association of Georgia is very excited to partner with Clean Cities for this very informative webinar. Really quick background on NGA. We were formed in 2015 with a mission to promote and advocate the safe and direct use of natural gas. We're made up of natural gas providers, pipeline companies, natural gas appliance manufacturers and marketers. And really the goal of the association is to educate state leaders and industrial, commercial, and residential customers on the safe direct use of natural gas. Next slide, please. I won't go through the entire list, but here are our members of NGA, and we continue to be excited about the engagement of our members as well as the results to date. As part of our mission, we created the Renewable Natural Gas Steering Board to promote and advocate for RNG. You can go to the next slide. That board was stood up officially the beginning of this year. And we are focused on the education and advocacy for renewable natural gas with the aim to grow RNG in the state of Georgia. So here's our current list of members. And like I said, 2021 has started off with a great start with this new group. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a great lineup of speakers today. RNG offers benefits really across the ecosystem, specifically with tremendous economic, environmental, and system benefits, many of which you will hear about today. We hope you find this webinar engaging and educational. It is being recorded, but feel free to write any questions in the comments area, and we'll try to address those at the end as we go through. But to start out, I'm pleased to turn it over to Commissioner Tim Echols for a regulatory perspective on RNG. So Commissioner Echols, all to you.
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me. I'm in a manure trailer actually out here on Steadfast Farm in Jackson County, and you know, in Georgia we've got a lot of horse farms, we got a lot of beef cow and dairy cow operations, and a lot of chicken farms. And my daughter has just mucked these stalls out, and you know, I guess I drew the short straw here. Fresh manure doesn't smell very good, by the way. But, you know, I've drawn the short straw. And while all of y'all are sitting behind your laptops, you probably got a little essential oil, you know, diffuser going. Here I am stuck in this blooming manure trailer. But you know what? This source of methane is incredible for our state. I think it represents a tremendous economic development opportunity. I mean, think about this. Hang on a second. Think about this. If we can recycle these trash bags, these grocery bags, and we can make playgrounds out of them, park benches, playground equipment. We take things that we're throwing away, and we're turning it into something useful. That is what horse manure, cow manure, and chicken manure represent. It represents a clean fuel that might otherwise be just spread across a field somewhere. And if we can work with our marketers and AGL and other gas companies, like even Marlin Gas Services, that's done this with a chicken facility in the Delmarva Peninsula, we can turn what would be considered waste and something that you city folks don't ever get around. But I'm telling you, this represents some great opportunity here. Yeah, we have internet out here. In fact, I got a little light on my camera right here in this manure trailer. I mean, we're all high tech out here, but we want to help poultry farmers understand how this can work, because we've got 4,000 chicken farms north of I-20, and Meredith and the Gas South folks, they work with a lot of them, and so do our other gas marketers. It's a tremendous opportunity. So I'm pleased to introduce Patrick from American Biogas, who's going to tell you more, give you more high-level introduction about what RNG is, where it comes from. We know that, and why we should make more of it, and what the best opportunities are. So, hey, thanks for tuning in with us today, and I hope you'll really support RNG. It is the next shiny object that we're going to be going for here in Georgia. Thank you, Patrick.
Tim, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And, they've got really good news for you. If we could put all that manure and all that organic material into a biogas system, not only will we be producing renewable energy, but it won't smell anymore. Because part of what a biogas system does is it takes all that organic material and it breaks it down in the process of generating the renewable energy. And as it breaks down all the volatile compounds that make odor. So it's a really, really great thing. Let me back up though, and we'll go into that a little bit more. And if you go to the next slide, we represent the biogas industry in the entire United States. We're the only organization that covers the whole sector. We're talking about 260 companies, about 3,000 professionals working on biogas systems. And our mission is really to build more biogas systems and therefore to create all the benefits that come along with those economic benefits, environmental benefits, you name it. There's a lot of good things that'll come from it. And this is what I'll get into. If you go to the next slide though, let's start out with this forum is all about RNG. And RNG comes from biogas, and biogas comes from organic material. So I'm going to show you how you make biogas, but just so that we are using the right words here, biogas is the raw gas that comes out of a digester, an anaerobic digester, or a landfill. And we call both of those biogas systems. They're both taking organic material, and the bugs in it are eating up the organic material, and they're burping out biogas. And biogas is mostly carbon dioxide and methane. And if you take out the carbon dioxide, you're left with pure methane. And that's basically what natural gas is that pure methane. But it's been renewably produced. So we call it renewable natural gas. So if your gas is interchangeable with the pipeline, if you've processed your biogas, then you get to call it RNG. It goes right into the pipeline, and you can't tell the difference between RNG and conventional natural gas, except for it's been renewably produced. Next slide, please. So here is a biogas system, and focus on the middle here. The middle here, you have some tanks. Maybe it's one tank, maybe it's 6 tanks, but you have a tank, and in that tank, you put all the stuff at the top that's going into it. You put in the manure like we saw on Tim's trailer there, or you can put wastewater biosolids from your wastewater plant, or you can put food scraps, or you can put the waste from like a brewery or food processor or the grease trappings, or you can put a mix of all those together. You put it into the tank, and all the microbes that are already present in that material, if you create a nice warm environment, I'm talking like body temperature, like an extra warm hot tub, those microbes are going to reproduce. And the microbes eat up the organic material, literally, and they burp out the methane. But see how the top of that roof there is domed, that's because the gas is captured in it. There's a flexible roof inside that expands and contracts with how much gas is being produced. We're capturing all of the methane because you don't want the methane to go out into the atmosphere. That's bad for our environment. That's bad for our air quality. You capture it, and that's your renewable energy that you get to use. So your products are the two categories down at the bottom there. You've got energy products on the left from your biogas. Usually, you can actually make bioplastics too, but usually the biogas is going to electricity or RNG when you upgrade it to natural gas quality, and where it might go into a vehicle fuel, or you're using it for heat. And then all the material that came in at the beginning, it still has all your great nutrients in it, but now it's fully digested. Now you've broken down, you've eliminated the odor, but you've created this nice, awesome, nutrient-rich material. It's got micronutrients, it's got nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all kinds of other great things in it. And that is like basically a super fertilizer. We have a farm I just read about that is now getting a 4th crop every year because they're using digested material on their fields. They were getting 3 crops before, now they get 4 crops. That's a 33% crop yield boost. That is huge for any farm, and it could happen in your garden too. I could show you my camera outside. We have digested material that we use as top dressing for our grass, and it looks awesome. Next slide, please. So I want to just give you a visual about what a couple biogas systems look like. The middle one there, you can see the same kind of system like we had in our infographic there, that domed tank. That's the digester. That's the heart of the system. On the left here, we have a pig farm, and they took their manure, they turned their manure lagoons into biogas systems. And now not only is that flexible roof that everyone's standing on there, not only is that capturing all the methane and the odor, it's also keeping the rainwater out to prevent flooding. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a system that is taking biogas and upgrading it to RNG. That's what some of that equipment looks like. Next slide. So here is why there's such a huge opportunity in the US and in Georgia and basically any state you go in. It's because we have so much organic material that is not being recycled. 66.5 million tons of food waste, 31 billion gallons of wastewater every day that has to be cleaned up so we can put clean water back into our waterways, and all the manure and nutrients from 8 billion cows, chickens, turkeys, and pigs, especially the poultry in Georgia, which I'll get into in a minute. This is where the whole potential for biogas and RNG comes from. It's all this organic material. And if there's one thing to take away, it's that as much as we care about recycling glass, metal, paper, and plastics, if we focus on recycling all of our organic material, like our manure and our food waste and our wastewater, we are going to have huge opportunities to do a lot better for our society. Next slide. Here's where we are, just some numbers to throw at you here. The bottom circle there, you can see the number of operational biogas systems in the country, a little bit over 2,000. We have biogas systems operating in every state. But that pales in comparison, if you look at the top right circle, to the potential for the country, at least 15,000 new systems. And that doesn't even count the poultry systems. It just happens to be that the analysis that we did, we don't have the full number of poultry farms quite yet. But that only counts dairy and swine. So that number is actually much larger. Traditionally, because of our policies, mostly national, but some state level policies, they've really incentivized the use of biogas systems to generate electricity. So of those 2,000 operational systems today, all but about 160 of them generate electricity today. But if you look at all the projects that are in development today, all the new projects coming online, 9 out of every 10 of those systems are developed as RNG systems because the policy landscape has shifted, and it's really much more attractive to building systems that are going to produce RNG to be able to displace transportation fuel and take carbon out of our transportation sector. Next slide. All right, so if you look at these are all the benefits, right? Or at least this is a summary of benefits. And what I want you to take away from this is that in any particular area, in any local town or city or anyone planning to put in a biogas system, you're probably going to be picking at least 1 or 2 of these that are going to drive the development of your system. But look at all the other benefits that you're getting along the way. There's so many. We've got economic benefits like diversifying the revenue on farms and in municipalities. We've got increased soil health, watershed protection by keeping nutrients from going out of the waterways, peak shaving with renewable energy, but also baseload power. Biogas systems can do both of those. No other renewable can say that they can do peak shaving and baseload power like we can. We've got distributed generation, jobs, the boosted crop yield that I talked about earlier, odor reduction, we talked about that, recycling infrastructure, better relationships with your farms because you can reduce the odor and generate local products. There's so many things to get out of your biogas system, and probably a couple of these will drive the development of a biogas system that might be near you someday if you don't already have one. Next slide. This is just to show you that the main drivers for the industry right now are policy related. I would love that it weren't like that. I would love that everyone just wanted to have a biogas system, that everyone realized we have to recycle all our food waste. We have to recycle all of our manure. We should not be landfilling our wastewater sludge. We should all be recycling it in biogas systems. But until that catches on nationally, these policies are really helping to drive the system. We've got local food waste, local and statewide food waste recycling policies. We've got federal and state level policies that give you credits if you generate renewable fuel for vehicles. Voluntary purchases of RNG, like if your business wants to buy RNG instead of conventional gas, there's some policies for that. And then other state programs that encourage the greenhouse gas reduction that come along with biogas systems. And last slide, please. All right, so here is your picture for Georgia. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but I do want to highlight two things. One is these fact sheets for the biogas potential for all 50 states are on the American Biogas Council website. So you can get to any of them at any time. They're free. Just go and take a look. One of the big opportunities in Georgia, Georgia actually ranks 4th out of all 50 states for its biogas production. And why is that? Well, you look at the organic material on the right-hand side of the page. And yeah, there's a lot of food waste because there's a lot of people. And yeah, there's a lot of wastewater because there's a lot of people. But look at all the broiler manure that the state has to manage. Out of the 12 million tons of manure in the entire state across your agriculture sector, 9.8 of it, almost 10 million tons of it, is from broiler manure. And that doesn't even count the agricultural waste that comes along with processing the broilers. So there's a huge potential to be able to take that resource and turn it into renewable energy, soil products, reduce odor, improve community relations and farming community relations. And with that, it's probably the perfect time to segue to Mike Giles, who's the president of the Georgia Poultry Association, to tell you a little bit more. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everyone. The Georgia Poultry Federation is a trade association that was established in 1951. We represent poultry processors, poultry farmers, and allied industry in Georgia. My goal this morning is to give everyone just an overview of the poultry industry in Georgia, its size, its scale, its impact, and also generally where it's located throughout the state, and then discuss some of the possible byproduct streams that have the potential to produce renewable natural gas. Next slide. Georgia is the leading broiler producing state in the nation. Broilers are chickens that are produced for meat. We're also a top 10 egg producing state. That's the table eggs. And then also we produce hatching eggs, or those are the breeding stock that becomes the broilers that go to our processing facilities. There are 20 first processing facilities in Georgia. These are the larger facilities. 18 of these are broiler facilities located throughout the state. And the poultry industry has an economic impact of approximately $40 billion in Georgia annually. Next slide. So this gives you an idea of where the poultry industry is located. These blue counties, there's of 159 counties, over 100 of the counties produce more than $1 million of poultry at the farm level. And those 20 facilities that I mentioned earlier, 18 of those are located throughout the state. About 70% of production is in the northern part of the state. People think of the poultry industry as being just a North Georgia thing, and it's really not true. If you look at the middle Georgia and South Georgia portions of the state that produce poultry, if that was a state unto itself, we would still be about the 7th largest state in the nation for poultry production. Next slide. So how does this translate into the scale of the industry? And some of these numbers are kind of staggering, so I just thought I'd break it down to a daily level. we produce about 31 million pounds of chicken per day. And 7 million table eggs. These are eggs we eat, and then 6.3 million hatching eggs. So to give you an idea, those 18 plants that I mentioned that are broiler plants, they would typically process about 250,000 birds per day. So that's 1.25 million birds per week. Some produce a little bit more, some a little less, but that's kind of an industry standard. That translates to 5 million chickens per day in Georgia, or 1.35 billion annually. Next slide. This gives you an idea of the way the industry has grown. That's going from 1970 to the latest full year data that we have. Less than 2 billion pounds produced in the 1970s, and now we're over 8 billion pounds produced. And the way the industry grows is incrementally and slow growth. Some commodities, depending on commodity prices or drought or other natural disasters, you can see wild swings in yield. But in our industry, a 1 or 2% increase steadily over time is more typical. But over time, that can mean dramatic increases in production. So, for example, since 1990, the Georgia poultry industry has grown 116% in the number of pounds produced, and we expect that to continue. Next slide. That's fine. And so, what will the demand be like? And you can see this is what's driving that increase in growth. And from 1960 to today, the demand for poultry, this is per capita consumption, less than 30 pounds per person in 1960. Now it's over 90 pounds per person, and that demand is continuing. One of the things we noticed during the pandemic is the demand for chicken did not slow down. Especially products like wings, and now with the chicken sandwich wars, we can see a really strong demand for chicken going forward. So we see the production levels in the future continuing to increase, along with exports. About 20% of what we produce is exported, and our export markets are strong as well. Next slide. So sustainability is very important to our processors and to our farmers, and we have really a remarkable story to tell over the past 50 years or so. This is a comparison of what it takes to produce 1 pound of chicken. It takes 75% fewer resources today because of efficiencies and innovations. And this is resources like land, farmland to produce the corn and soybeans that are required to feed our chickens, the water it takes to process, the fossil fuels. All of this translates into about a 36% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per pound today compared to 1975. So sustainability is critically important to our industry, and we think that's part of the story that can be told as the renewable gas opportunities increase as well. Next slide. So just to end up, the two main byproduct streams that have the potential to produce renewable natural gas from our industry is the poultry manure generated on the farm, as mentioned earlier, and then the poultry byproducts generated at the processing plants. And these are typically what we in the industry call secondary poultry nutrients. These are a byproduct for our wastewater treatment facilities. Both of these products are currently being beneficially used throughout the state to increase soil fertility on our pastures and our cropland. But having an alternative use for these materials not only has the potential to create energy, but also retain those valuable nutrients that are so important and critically important to our farmers to make sure our croplands remain fertile. So that's the opportunities as I see it, and I think one that could enhance the sustainability story that is so important to our industry and our consumers. So that'll end with that. And then next on our agenda is McLean Porter. He's Senior Director of Energy at Bioenergy DevCo. McLean?
Thanks, Mike. So I'm McLean Porter. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm the Senior Director of Energy with Bioenergy DevCo, where we have been, if you can see behind me here, we've been making and building and operating these anaerobic digesters that we're talking about here today. We've been operating these for a little over 2 decades, and we're here in Georgia addressing the issues we're talking about because we see a tremendous opportunity for putting these anaerobic digestions really into play with integrating into the poultry industry. If you'll go to the next slide. Anaerobic digestion, as you heard from Patrick a little earlier, you know, it's really a way for the organic materials that are typically either, you know, landfilled or land applied. We're providing a way for these materials to be consumed by the same bacteria that would naturally consume them in a contained and an enclosed environment that will produce very beneficial products. We're going to produce renewable natural gas or renewable electricity. We're going to also produce an organic soil amendment. And so when you think about, if you'll go to the next slide, you think about these feedstocks, as we call them, that Mike was talking about. You think about these byproducts coming out of the poultry industry and many other kind of food production facilities. You think about how these are really just another organic material. It's a means of putting the organic material back into the natural environment, back into the farmlands that we're all utilizing for that production. So we're talking about kind of providing playing back into the natural cycle, right? And so right now, a lot of these byproducts coming out of the poultry industry in particular are, you know, for one really big feedstock that we address is these DAF cakes and DAF sludges. So most big poultry facilities are going to have a wastewater processing component to their facility, and as the wastewater is processed, you get a lot of this. If you go and look at them, there's going to be a big foam that rises to the top of the wastewater tanks. That foam is all of the organic material floating to the top of that water. And so they wind up skimming a lot of that foam off, and it becomes, they either dry it out, it'll become a cake, or they pump it out, and it'll pump it out into tanker trucks as a sludge. And what we're doing with this stuff today is we're going out and we're land applying this organic material to provide the nutrient value needed for farmlands, or it's going into other larger wastewater facilities, or it's going to a landfill. So again, we're here to try to just provide an alternative means of processing that material. And if you'll go on to the next slide, we'll get into kind of, we'll got a couple of images here to just kind of showcase how we're going to process this material. So this slide shows how as the different feedstocks come in, we're looking at, again, these DAF, the dissolved air flotation materials. We're looking at any kind of organic material that is a byproduct of a food processing facility, and the poultry litter coming from the poultry industry. All this stuff is going to come into this loading bay that you see here, and it's all going to get kind of slurried up and mixed together into one big tank, so that I could make it themselves. We've got a little feedback coming. Thank you. So all this material, we want to process it into one big slurry tank, and it kind of becomes a big soup, right? So we actually design our facilities to accommodate the different profiles of feedstock that we're going to address from the region that's surrounding the facility that we're building. And if you'll go to the next slide, after it gets into that kind of homogenized soup tank, then we're ready to feed it into the big digester tank. The big digester tank is actually going to allow for, as Patrick described earlier, these microbes that are already existing in this organic material are going to start consuming that matter. It's the same thing that happens to a banana peel that you throw on the side of the road. The natural microbes are going to consume it. It's going to decay. In this case, we're we're enabling that to happen in an enclosed environment where we can capture and harness all of the potential. A lot of that potential is going to be in the form of the biogas that's produced. The other potential, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is that soil amendment byproduct as well. And so if you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk about just that. So this soil amendment, the way that it comes out the back end of the digester system, it's coming out as a digestate, and it's about a 4% solids content in a liquid waste stream. And so what we wind up doing is we filter out the remaining organic material in that liquid through a reverse osmosis filtration system. The liquid will then it'll either be used for dust control, dust management. It'll be used to go back into the sewage system, or whatever the local environment needs that liquid to go back into. And the remaining organic material that we separate out, that's what becomes this nutrient-rich soil amendment. And so the really interesting thing that we're able to do here is, as opposed to when and if you'll actually go to the next slide, you'll see some imagery of this byproduct, of this product that we're producing. With a lot of these, the poultry litter and the DAF sludges, right now these sludges are going and being land applied, and the nutrient value, the NPK balance, is such that you've got such a nitrogen rich material that the crops can't necessarily can't always absorb all of it because the NPK balance isn't quite right. So what we can do in our systems is we can actually fine tune that NPK balance to accommodate what is needed in the farms that we're gonna deliver this soil amendment to. So we're not necessarily taking away that process. Instead, we're just improving the process of re-delivering that organic material back into the natural environment where it's needed, especially on these farmlands. And then if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see a rendering of actually a facility that we're under construction on right now up in Maryland. This facility, I like this image. It shows the enclosed nature of the entire process. The entire process we're talking about here, as opposed to it going and being land applied, as opposed to it going to a landfill, every step of the way, from when that waste comes in from the tanker trucks or from the roll-off trucks, it comes into that feed bay that we saw earlier in the little cartoon image. It's actually going to be, you're going to be delivering that into a feed bay where the bay door comes up, and you've got a reverse vacuum system that sucks all the air in. And from that point on, all that material remains in an enclosed system as it gets tanked, as it gets piped through the different series of tanks that we saw in those cartoon images. And then if you'll go on to the next slide, we'll talk about the gas. So the gas that we're producing is like Patrick described, it's a biogas. It's about a 60% methane content with about a 40% carbon dioxide and a couple other nasty things in there. So what we'll do is, if you'll go on to the next slide, we'll condition that biogas through, there's a few different means of processing these. With anaerobic digestion, we typically like to use a membrane system, which effectively just filters out that carbon dioxide content, brings the 60% methane content up to about a 96% methane content, so that it can become pipeline quality gas. And then from there, if you'll go on to this next slide, there's a handful of different ways that we wind up getting this gas, this renewable natural gas, to market. The renewable natural gas, if the state that we're operating in does not have its own kind of incentive program, then what we'll do is we'll typically put it into the pipeline, and it'll be transported to either a state where they do have these incentives, like the low carbon fuel standard that's active in Oregon and in California, or if there's a big operation like L'Oreal has quite famously been doing a lot of RNG consumption. There's a lot of big like data centers are starting to look at consuming renewable natural gas as a means of decarbonizing their energy consumption portfolios. So we'll put it into the natural gas pipeline system that's already in existence, and we'll use our renewable natural gas production as a means of decarbonizing that system, transporting that gas to its end user. The other big consumer of natural gas, which you'll hear a lot more from later on, is folks like UPS. These guys are consuming. They're one of the largest consumers of renewable natural gas in the country, because they've got a massive fleets across the country that are consuming compressed natural gas in their trucking fleets. And there's all these incentive programs, like we heard from Patrick, the renewable fuel standard, that really produces a lot of value for both the producer and the end user. These trucking fleets, there's a lot of incentives to allow these folks to make it it makes a lot of economic sense for these folks to be consuming the renewable natural gas in their systems. Now, finally, if the state has either had some kind of low carbon fuel standard type system, or if you've got a system where the Public Service Commission has enabled the local utility to sell the natural gas to their customer base, then we can actually allow this product to be an option for folks to, residents or business operators to also have the option to decarbonize their own their own energy consumption. So these are the ways we're getting the gas into the market, and you'll hear more about how that actually happens from our next speaker, Mr. Kevin McCracken, good friend of ours over at Marlin Gas Services and Chesapeake Utilities.
You're on mute, Kevin.
Sorry about that, folks. I'm Kevin McCracken. I'm Vice President of Business Development for Chesapeake and run Marlin Gas Services, which is our virtual pipeline company. Next slide. So I want to focus on, there's different roles in the value chain related to RNG. I'm going to be focusing on from the transportation, be it pipelines or virtual pipelines, the interconnection with the pipeline system that has to be put in place, and then the RNG offtake, which was just talked about by McLean. So let's go to the next slide. So we're involved in, we've seen before as we've discussed this, the various pathways that you're going to go through and the various things you have to do in order to condition the gas. The only reason I put this slide in is to talk a little bit about Chesapeake from the standpoint that these are the various areas that you can really provide value in, which is you go out and contract for the feedstock, and then you put the AD in and the EPC contracting to build out the facilities, the biogas cleanup equipment and contracting, then it gets to the pipelines and virtual pipelines, the interconnection design and construction, whether the pipeline does that or they allow a third party to do that, the offtake agreements associated with the gas. And then finally, in order to get the incentives, you really have to put the gas through the CNG station. So you're going to have people developing CNG stations and operating those. And then you have to have a fleet of CNG tractor cabs. So you have to get the fleets involved. So those are the various areas that you can be involved in. And Chesapeake's involved in all of these different areas in the RNG stream. Next slide. So the success of RNG is going to be based on a number of factors that include the policies that are associated with the environmental ESG that's being pushed on the different companies that are out there, access and interconnection with natural gas infrastructure, which you would think would be pretty simple, but it is a pretty complex process. And some systems don't want the gas and others do. And so you have challenges associated with that. Development of natural gas fueling stations and deployment of natural gas vehicles. This is an area that isn't as focused on, but is going to be needed. In order to generate the incentives, you have to put the gas into a CNG tractor, and therefore the development of more CNG stations should be forthcoming. And then you got to overcome just national bias towards gas and just some of the things that are going on with related to fracking and electrification. So we got to be proactive and educate everybody in order to be successful here. Next slide. So the virtual pipeline system, how does that work? Well, you create the waste goes into the biogas, it goes into the processing facility where it's cleaned up to pipeline quality. And pipeline quality for a CNG trailer is the same as it would be as if it's going into a pipeline. And these CNG trailers are pretty large, pretty heavy. They can carry about up to 500 decatherms of gas. And then finally, what you do is you transport it over to a pipeline interconnection or a customer location. And you have to have a regulation unit to take the pressure, because the pressure in those trailers is about 3,000 to 3,600 pounds. And you're going to want, your applications are typically going to be between 0 and 150 pounds. So the regulator has to take that pressure off of the trailer and cut the gas down to pressure that the application can use. So that's how a virtual pipeline works. And it's pretty similar actually to just a regular pipeline. The thing you're avoiding with a virtual pipeline is two of the biggest problems in building a pipeline is getting right of way and getting permits. And that's how a lot of the pipeline systems today are being challenged by the environmental groups, is because of those two areas that they have to go get permits and they have to get the right of way. You don't have to do that when you're doing a virtual pipeline system. Next slide. Speaking to the CNG itself and where we're involved, we're actually in the process of building the largest, with our partners at Southern Company Gas, the largest public CNG station on the Eastern Seaboard. It'll be at the Port of Savannah, and it's on Long Range Road. And we're putting a very large station in because we can accommodate that to fill our trailers. So it'll be able to handle up to almost 200 trucks a day. And there's 12,000 trucks a day. It says 7,000 there. They now up to 12,000 in the last year, the amount of truck traffic on that road. It's the major part of the entryway to the port. Next slide. Okay, so what is the CNG advantage versus price when you look at diesel tractors versus CNG tractors? And it's getting wider because diesel's increasing in price. So I put this together just to kind of show where's the price at today. And then the big difference is when you get into crude oil or gasoline, almost 50 to 60% of your cost is typically in your commodity, where you'll see it's only 20% natural gas. So what does that do? That reduces volatility. That means you can buy gas commodity prices out into the future at a lot cheaper price. And typically the rest of those costs are fixed, so you don't have to worry about those costs. Next slide. Reducing emissions. One of the things I get challenged on is that, okay, you take the RNG and you put it in a gas distribution system, but we hear there's methane leaking all over the place. And they've done studies, they've really come out in the inventory of US greenhouse gases that less than 1% of emissions come off of natural gas distribution systems. It's typically your organic and ag is over 50% of it. You got other transportation areas, and then local distribution systems will make up only 1% of it. Next slide. So I'm introducing Ian Skelton. Ian and I were fortunate enough to work together, and he's director of natural gas vehicles at Atlanta Gas Light. Thanks, Ian. Take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. Next slide. So this slide recaps some of what we've already heard, but I'm going to focus on the box on the right, which is the end use applications for RNG. RNG is transported in pipelines and delivered to end users, both for thermal and transportation uses. As already discussed, most of the RNG produced today is used in the transportation market due to the policy-driven incentives from the federal RFS, Renewable Fuel Standard Program, and the states that have low carbon fuel standard programs. But there's also a growing interest in the voluntary market to use RNG in buildings and homes and in the thermal markets and for industrial manufacturing. And the market for homes and businesses and industrial uses is expected to grow as the industry begins to use renewable thermal certificates to quantify the benefits for these heating applications. MRETS, an organization that validates the environmental attributes of energy, has created an RNG tracking system to avoid double counting concerns. And Green E is currently working to create a new standard and certification program for RNG. So regardless of end use, RNG is a sustainable waste management solution, a clean and reliable energy option, and has a positive impact on local economies. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus a bit more on the transportation applications. The use of RNG last year increased to 53% of the total amount of natural gas used for transportation in this country. And to put that in perspective, the annual volume is equivalent to eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from 8.7 billion miles traveled from passenger vehicles, or the sequestered carbon from 4.3 million acres of forests. Next slide, please. Atlanta Gas Light has a long history of supporting the CNG market here in Georgia. We began our program back in the early 90s to work with our fleet customers. And of course, we're delivering the gas to the end users, to the CNG stations. We're also building and maintaining CNG stations for our customers. So people can turn to us for delivery of the gas and the construction and maintenance of the stations. And of course, the end use market for transportation is primarily your fleet applications, the return to base, centrally fueled vehicles such as regional trucking, public transportation, and refuse collections. Next slide, please. So how does RNG add value for CNG fleets? Well, first of all, using RNG in your vehicles allows you to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions on a welded wheels basis by up to 70%, or even carbon negative, depending on the source of RNG from certain agricultural digesters. And so it's the same vehicles, the same equipment fueling the vehicles. It's just how you source the gas. So RNG for CNG is a low-cost way to reduce your carbon footprint, and in the right applications, the vehicles pay for themselves and achieve a positive ROI. So it really compares favorably to other projects that a corporation or organization might be pursuing to reduce their greenhouse gases on a dollar per pound of emissions basis. And the current market, if you were to use RNG for transportation in Georgia, this is an illustration of the cost of the gas itself. Has been trading around $3 in that range. Using round numbers, the federal RFS program, the credits for the D3 RINs, as they're called, has been hitting $30, back up to $30 an MMBTU. So the actual value of the RNG is considerably more than just the regular pipeline flowing gas. Next slide, please. So Atlanta Gas Light has been facilitating the delivery of RNG to market for quite a few years now. We put in place a couple of tariff rates. The TS1 rate is the rate that allows an interconnect if an RNG producer, whether it be from an agricultural digester, a landfill, wastewater treatment plant, whatever, processes the gas up to the pipeline quality standards, they can inject the gas into our system under the TS1 rate and deliver the gas to market. Under the TS2 rate, the medium BTU projects, as we call them, where the gas is not processed to pipeline quality, but you process it enough to be able to distribute it through a dedicated pipeline for uses such as cogen or other industrial boiler load uses, that sort of thing. We build the pipeline to move the gas from point A to point B. It's not interconnected with our system, but it allows the gas to be delivered to those end uses, and we provide that service under the TS2 rate. Next slide, please. This is a map of the public CNG stations in Georgia. We look forward to adding another dot on the map down in Savannah. There'll be another station there. As Kevin mentioned, we're building one for Chesapeake down there in Savannah, right outside the port. And so we will have 26 public access stations And it's possible to make arrangements with CNG retailers to purchase RNG and fuel vehicles at these stations. Next slide, please. If it makes sense, or there's not a station in your area, it makes sense to build one on site. A fleet operator can also elect to have AGL build a station. This is a picture of one we built down in Oglethorpe, Georgia. As you can see, it's 2 dispensers, 2 hoses on each dispenser, high capacity station suitable for fueling Class 8 trucks. And under the AGL V52 rate, we would work with the customer to custom design the station that meets their needs. It could be a time fill station for a refuse application that wanted to fill their trucks overnight. This is a fast fill station. The customer would provide the land. Typically, they would do any site development, and then we would come in and build the station, own and maintain the equipment. And the station could be public access or private, depending on the fleet's needs. And the customer, the fleet operator or the retailer for the CNG station would basically buy the natural gas like they normally would for a commercial building, and would use the equipment to make their own CNG. So we're not in the CNG retail space, but we're the provider of the infrastructure behind the scenes to help facilitate the CNG station development. And we recover our costs through a simple 1.5% per month facilities charge, which recovers our cost of capital, our authorized rate of return, maintenance, et cetera, on the installation. And it makes a lot of sense because, you know, we have the resources to do this across the state, and people don't have to get in the business of trying to maintain their own CNG equipment. Next slide, please. So that's all I have. I'm going to introduce Mike McDonald, Director of Maintenance and Engineering, one of our key customers. He's with UPS. Mike is also a board member at Clean Cities, Georgia, and we appreciate them joining us today. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ian. First slide, please. This is just kind of an introductory eye candy. The tractor on the left, the Class 8 tractor, if you notice the compartment in the back of it, those are CNG tanks that are stacked. On the middle, you see a package delivery truck, which also uses CNG RNG. And the top right is a LNG tractor. You can tell with our particular fleet because the tanks are saddle tanks that are on the side. And just a little history how we got to this point. We started with LNG some years back in Tennessee. We were looking for an alternative fuel that would work in our Class 8 vehicles that would travel great distances. So LNG became the fuel of choice at the time, simply because at the time CNG equipment wasn't available that could get the kind of miles that we were looking for. So we went down the path of using LNG, and we started in Tennessee because it had the density or the amount of tractors is great, and we also had the mileage, which basically our tractors in Tennessee was like a halfway point where tractors would come into Tennessee and then travel north or west or whatever. Later, we switched to CNG as the technology caught up with it, and from there, we started using the RNG. Next slide, please. So when we talk about sustainability, sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of different groups, a lot of different people. When we talk about sustainability when it comes to the environment, these are just some of the drivers that are out there actually now, and depending on which use a research report, you'll have probably several other reasons that sustainability is picking up speed along with the move to lower emissions vehicles that are used in transportation. Just other things to note. Along with transportation, one of the things that actually boosted or I should say that entered into or sped up sustainability efforts was with the pandemic. We all kind of slipped into the habit of ordering things online. Unfortunately, since the pandemic has let up a little, the online ordering really hasn't slowed down any. And this, as you've probably noticed, has increased the amount of vehicles in your neighborhood delivery packages from several different sources, us being one of them. So there's a renewed look, or even a stronger look at the transportation. We're also looking at the airline fleet. And also, if you think about it, you look at railway fleets, and also you look at ocean fleets as other ways to further reduce your dependence on fossil fuels. And RNG, CNG has been an option that's been discussed. Next slide, please. Just where we anticipate to be by the end of 2021 with the purchases of RNG, and not just RNG, but CNG, LPG, renewable diesel, biodiesel. And we're just now really starting to meaningfully track the amount of electricity in anticipation of electric fleet being in the very near future. But also you notice in each block, if you look at the bottom of it, some of them depict the amount of fuel that has been used since a certain period of time. And for instance, the first slide, we've used 485 million GGE of CNG, LNG since 2014, which is a great deal. And also, if you look the next box over, we have the same situation with renewable natural gas, where since 2019, we used 144 million gallons. Next slide, please. This is just a slide that talks about just how easy it's been for us to switch to RNG. It's a drop in fuel. The usage, we anticipate growing 32% over last year. And we still are pretty much building out our infrastructure and our CNG fleet with different facilities as far as growing our fleet with purchasing more vehicles. If you just look at the chart in the bottom left, you'll notice from 2019 to 2021, just alone how much RNG has risen. Next slide, please. This slide just depicts that 61% of our natural gas portfolio in 2021. So as the year goes on, we're increasing our portfolio. As time goes on, we'll probably further increase our RNG, CNG, LNG portfolio. And I will say that we are actually looking at renewable LNG now, liquid natural gas now, for our LNG fleet. If you look at the top left, this is just what's been committed, fuel commitments per contract. And if you look at the blue volume, you can see that the CNG is smaller than the RNG, because it's starting to switch places where we're starting to actually take on more RNG than CNG in places where we can do that. Of course, on the right hand, the lower right hand side, it talks about the amount of stations that are already contracted to use RNG, and the stations that we look to in the future to use RNG in place of CNG, or intermittently, or I should say interchangeably. Next slide, please. So let's bring this back to Georgia, where we are, where UPS is in Georgia. We currently have 4 buildings that use CNG, RNG in Florida. We have the Sandy Creek building, which is the newest building in Atlanta. We have the Tifton building. We have the Doraville, which is the same thing as the Pleasantdale building over on Pleasantdale Road. And then we have the old Atlanta building, which some of the fleet bled off into the new Sandy Creek facility, which is very close, a distance from the old building. And within those 4 stations last year, we put out we used about 8 million of CNG, RNG fuel. The Sandy Creek facility alone is our newest facility, right now our largest one in the United States, and by itself it does 4.3 million gallons of CNG in 2020. And all the Georgia CNG sites are using renewable fuel, or renewable diesel. Next slide, please. This just depicts our fleet internationally and also in the US. On the left side is United States, and you can see compressed natural gas is probably the largest alternative fuel vehicle that we use right now. And then under that, you have the amount of LNG vehicles that we use. And then further down the red, you look at the propane vehicles that we use. Whereas if you look at internationally on the right side, it's not the same, just based on the way they do things compared to where we do things and where they are with their sustainability and climate efforts compared to where the United States is. And you see that for them, the most amount of gas vehicles that they're using currently are propane vehicles. And compressed natural gas is in second place, and the majority of those are used in the Canada region. Next slide, please. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So I think we wanted to have a little bit of time for questions. Frank and I were going to field a few from the group. While we're waiting on maybe some to come in, I will ask two. Kevin, I'll direct the first one to you. You had spoken a little bit about kind of that hub and spoke design, and for those that may not be familiar with that vocabulary, that's where you can potentially aggregate some different renewable natural gas locations and basically organic material to be able to create one larger project. And so, Kevin, could you talk a little bit about how maybe some of the virtual pipelines can help in that regard to try to use some of the aggregation to really tap into maybe some of those smaller potential biogas sources?
Sure, thanks, Robin. Yeah, so as this is evolving, a lot of times what you're going to find is that where the waste is at is rural, and it's not where their pipeline systems are really developed, nor where the pipelines really need the gas at. So what's happened is, because of that, you've evolved the virtual pipeline system as a means of getting the gas from one point to another point without having to go get right away permitting. And secondly, what you can do is you can go to different points with the gas. You can get a summer point and a winter point if that's what works best for the pipeline, and therefore makes it more flexible. Now, going back to the production side, as Robin pointed out, especially if you look at dairy or swine, what happens is typically, it's more of a liquid manure, and you can't really transport it through a pipe or get it to a centralized location. So what you have to do then is you have to do the anaerobic digester setup right at the farm, and then you generate the RNG there and you pick it up with trailers, and you can actually do kind of a milk run where you go to 2 or 3 locations and pick up the gas, so you optimize your assets and you don't have to spend as much on your assets. And then you find one point with the pipeline where they want it injected. And what's also starting to happen in the industry is pipelines are getting smarter, and they're creating hubs for themselves where they're identifying a spot where they can take the gas year round because it blends in well, and they'll set up a large yard that multiple RNG projects can come into and unload their RNG into the system. So the market's definitely evolving. It's really an emerging market still, but a lot of the aspects of it are changing in order to minimize your infrastructure and maximize your flexibility to get the gas to market.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Another question that kind of came to mind, and maybe Mike or McLean, maybe you guys would be the best ones to direct this to, but can one of you talk a little bit about some of the economic development opportunities associated with these projects, specifically around additional revenue for some of the feedstock producers, or jobs created in the area? Can you all talk a little bit about those benefits?
I can touch on the kind of some of the job creation components to the facilities, and then I'll probably hand it over to Mike for him to touch on the direct effect that we're looking at with the poultry folks, because we've been talking about this for a little while between the two of us. These facilities, so depending on the scale, of course, if again the size facility that I've got here behind me, we're looking at creating, in the first 18 to 24 months of construction, installation, commissioning, we're looking at producing 150 to 220 direct and indirect jobs related to that entire process. in terms of long-term job creation, again, depending on the scale of both the facility and what we're doing with the digestate, if we're incorporating a compost bagging operation into the mix, we're going to look at somewhere between 25 and 50 jobs long-term for, we plan for 20 to 30 years for these facilities to operate.
Hey, thanks, McLean. Robin, if I could just pick up on that. The facility that you showed that you're building in Maryland.
Yes.
How long would it take for that facility to stand up? And is that what you would envision a facility would look like next to a poultry farm?
We sure would. Yeah. We want it to, again, we want it to maintain a pretty clean appearance, and it really does keep all of the entire process enclosed, like we talked about. That would look pretty similar to what we're looking at building near some poultry facilities. In fact, if any of you have been to Mike's Poultry Federation lab and taken their tour and seen the big train set that shows the big old panorama of the entire kind of poultry industry and all the different components in there, we're actually, I don't know, Mike, can I share a secret here?
Yeah, please.
We're working on right now with their modeler to install on that train set model a 3D the level of detail that those modelers are putting in there is just everything to the T. So we're actually working with him to install a miniature digester system on there to showcase just that, how the plants are that we're looking at installing into and incorporating incorporating these digester facilities into the poultry industry.
Thank you. A question that came into the chat about poultry facility or a swine facility. What kind of ROI can those business owners anticipate? What does that look like? Anyone? McLean or Kevin?
Well, the business owner. So, I mean, we don't even require, like if a poultry producer wants a facility as incorporated with his operation, we're not going to require that he invests $1. We'll put up all our own cash in order to install that facility on there. We'll look at him as a partner on feedstock provisions, and we'll look to incorporate cost savings for his entire operation, make sure that it's economically beneficial for everybody involved, of course. But we're looking at incorporating these things into the poultry industry without requiring anybody to put up $1.
That's great. A question for Kevin or Ian. The question is about the use of RNG certificates. Do they think this will provide the currency lubricant to ramp the market up? Kevin or Ian?
Well, I'll comment real quick and then I'll let Ian pick up from there. You're seeing a market that's emerging, and there's a lot of opportunity out there, and there's a lot of legislative and regulated and then non-regulated products being developed. And one way to get around using the EPA is the federal system for incentives, or the state, like California's low carbon fuel standard, is there's a market evolving which involves RNG certificates. Tries to get you around those two and has different terms and conditions associated with it. Meanwhile, in the background, there's multiple states starting to develop low carbon fuel standard products. And I think there's other products that are going to come out for the financial markets. And then you got the Canadian markets developing. So you're starting to get a lot of options around where you get your incentives, because these projects are tough to pencil out, kind of like solar was when it started. Tough to pencil these out with a return unless you're getting some type of financial incentive. So that's why you're seeing a lot of the projects, especially in the manure space, trying to go to California to get lower carbon fuel standard credits. And to go back and comment on the ROI associated with this, there's ancillary investments all up and down the chain here. And we as a utility look for the ones that are involved in the regulated side, meeting regulated returns. Meanwhile, if you're looking at strictly the AD project and what the returns are on that investment, It's driven by whether you really go in the incentive markets or you don't. And therefore the returns vary different, very mightily between those two. But obviously with private equity entering and they're seeing returns that are north of 15 to 20% on a lot of these projects when they're done right. So, so just to close out on the certificates. So I think the certificates is one pathway that's being developed. My personal view is I think a lot of the state programs will catch up and create a lot of incentives because they're going to want to keep the waste, the cleanup of the waste and the associated byproducts associated with that process in state for the benefit of the state getting labor jobs and creating financial opportunities for companies within their states. That's just my view on it. Ian?
I'll jump in there because Ian and I work together pretty closely on some of the certificates, and you know, obviously he's more focused in on some of the transportation market, but for the voluntary market, you know, I think some of these certificates are important as customers are looking kind of for that tangible, you know, this is what my, you know, dollar did. Similar to solar markets of years past with the RECs having that kind of renewable thermal certificate or RNG certificate, you know, whatever the name winds up being. I think will be important for voluntary customers just to kind of demonstrate their commitment to utilization and introduction of renewable natural gas into their portfolio. So it's encouraging to see that the markets are converging, as you said, Kevin, around opportunities for both the transportation sector as well as heat and thermal opportunities for customers with residential, commercial, as well as industrial. So I think it's a lot of great market momentum that can really spearhead additional opportunities for these type projects, and will help also with education as well.
Thanks, Robin.
Frank, I just realized I failed to answer one of the questions that you asked, and I'll do this real quick. The one about how long it actually takes to build these things. So the early stage, of course, is just figuring out the early stage developments, making conversations into some form of reality. Once we sort out the relationships associated with how the development will function, and we actually start, you know, putting conversations onto paper, from there, once we kind of are able to get some sort of notice to proceed and get approval for the investment, we're able to engineer, design, construct, and commission one of these plants within about 12 to 18 months.
Great, thanks, McLean. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Other questions in the chat. What are the energy resilience benefits of adding RNG into the natural gas portfolio within the state? You think about resiliency, and I'll just use this as an example. We obviously all experienced the Colonial Pipeline issue. When you think about natural gas being piped to facilities, you no longer have the issue of trucks delivering diesel to facilities because you got pipeline fuel delivered. So you're taking those trucks off the road. You have that resiliency built into your system. So anybody else want to comment about that?
Yeah, Frank, this is Patrick. Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
I think one of the key things is that we want to build the systems that are recycling all the organic material and producing the energy. And then once you have that, you can use it for whatever it's needed. So if right now we need a lot of RNG, we need to take the biogas to RNG to go to transportation because that's either the most lucrative or the best from a carbon reduction perspective or what have you, you can do that. But let's say a couple years down the road, maybe the transportation sector changes again. And what we really need is peak shaving for electricity. Well, you've still got all the biogas production if you built those facilities, so you can switch over to electricity and do that. Or let's say really the gas really needs to be used so that the companies in a state or the companies in an area that have to make their widgets using natural gas because they need high heat, and those companies are trying to reduce their carbon footprint for their products, they really need that gas for heat. Well, again, you've got the gas, it's in the pipeline, you can use it for that. So I think that's really how you get, in terms of energy resilience, is that flexibility of being able to use the energy in many different ways. that you really get from it, and that's a huge advantage for resiliency.
Thanks, Patrick.
Frank, this is PJ. One other thing that I would just mention there is it does provide a local supply. So one of the things that's important just for the supply of natural gas in the Southeast is most of the natural gas is produced elsewhere and piped to Georgia. So one of the things that you need to think of when you think of these RNG facilities is they produce natural gas here in Georgia, and it's local. And so if there was any kind of disruption of supply in any of the other areas of the country, we would have local production here that could keep systems running. It could also support further economic growth and pipeline extensions to areas of the state that may be constrained at the moment.
You know, PJ, if I could just jump in here, a really interesting anecdote that absolutely buttresses what you just said. When we had the big freeze down in Texas, and you know, there were a lot of challenges with the RNG infrastructure down there. Guess which part of the RNG or the natural gas infrastructure? The RNG facilities were all still performing and producing during that time. And it was only if they needed to be shut down for safety reasons or other reasons that the gas wasn't getting online. So, you know, these systems are able to perform in a variety of extreme conditions.
All good points. Thank you, PJ, Patrick. Appreciate that. Any other questions? While we're waiting to see if any come into the chat, I would like everyone just to know that we will make this presentation, since it was recorded, we will post this to the Clean Cities Georgia website. You'll be able to access it there. For everyone that registered, because we had some technical difficulties in getting everybody logged in, and we will send out a link to the presentation. So for those folks that had issues earlier on and you might have missed something at the beginning, we'll make sure that you get that as well. While we're waiting for any more questions, and Robin, I'll turn over to you here in a minute. I do want to thank the great folks at Gas South, Meredith, and Velvet, and PJ for helping us put this together. Great partners with Clean Cities Georgia to help put this together. And of course, Robin with NGA, supporting NGA. We appreciate that as well. So thank you, everyone that makes this possible, and all of our speakers. You've got their contact information if you want to reach out to them individually. If we can help you through Clean Cities, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for. And Robin, if there's no more questions, I'll turn it over to you for any closing comments.
Yeah, no, I echo much of what you said. I think this has been a great discussion. I think it's laying a tremendous framework and foundation, you know, for education efforts and just realization of what is out there in terms of RNG potential in Georgia. I think hopefully we have all learned a lot today that there is tremendous potential, not only for environmental benefits, but also economic development and others. So I'm also very grateful for our speakers today. Please also be on the lookout for additional webinars in the future, potentially even a site visit. And, you know, definitely thank you to Meredith. Without her, this would not be possible. So thank you all so much for all of the discussion. I think we have one more question that came in. And it looks like it seems like concerns over methane released from processing facilities as a greenhouse gas concern are missing the bigger picture. If natural processes take place without intervention, then 100% of the naturally formed methane would seemingly be released. Can someone speak to this? So there's a little bit more information. Maybe Patrick or others, y'all want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. Oh, go ahead, McLean.
Yeah, just a quick note on this. I mean, like I said, you smell a landfill because the landfill is not enclosed, right? We're trying to make this whole process enclosed to the point where if you are smelling any gas, or if gas is being released, we're losing money. We don't want to do that. We don't want you smelling anything, and we don't want to be releasing anything. The gas being produced, yes, is part of the natural process, but it winds up being consumed in a way where that methane is destroyed. So it's not it's processed, it's put into the pipe, and then it's consumed and destroyed. in a way that the methane's not released into the atmosphere.
Thanks, McLean. I think that that economic incentive to make sure that there are no leakages and everything is trapped is very, very strong. I can just say, and I'd be happy to show you a link to literature that shows this. And I think Ian or one of our other speakers already spoke to leakages. Leakages are really in the like 0 to 2% across natural gas infrastructure. That's true of biogas systems as well. So we're talking about ultra low chances of leakage. Of course, any system with any gas is going to leak somewhat. Anyone that claims a 0% leakage is not telling the truth to you, right? Because that's just not the way the world works. But we're talking ultra low, very closed, ultra low leakages, very closed systems. And perhaps what's even more important than that is what would have happened if we didn't capture this gas. All of those emissions were going in the atmosphere. You leave a pile of food waste, all of those methane emissions are going in the atmosphere. The methane that was going into the atmosphere from not going into the atmosphere. And in addition to that, we've used that methane to displace often fossil fuels. And that's where you get carbon negative gas, because you've reduced the methane emissions that were already going to the atmosphere. You reduce carbon emissions coming from transportation. And now you're taking net more carbon out of our society, out of our world, than there would have been if there was no system in place. So we need to keep leakages low and make sure that that's important, but we're talking about overall huge benefits with these systems.
Let me just add one thing, if I could, to that, and more, it's Georgia centric, really. So what climate change is focused on is three things. First off, one is CO2 released to the atmosphere. Second is methane, because it's 80 times worse than the CO2. And then lastly, nitrous oxide, which is 300 times worse than CO2 emissions to the atmosphere. The poultry cleanup, when you clean up poultry, there's high levels of nitrogen in poultry. And that's part of the reason that it's such an important cleanup, is it's going to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, which is actually a lot worse than methane emissions during the cleanup process of that waste. And so there's a big benefit in Georgia, not only that we're cleaning up methane that would go in the atmosphere, but the nitrous oxide that could potentially enter the atmosphere.
Kevin, this is Patrick. I was just looking at the NOx statistics for the Cummins natural gas engine, which is one of the most popular engines to be used for natural gas trucks. And their NOx emissions are 90% below EPA's NOx standards.
So I think we saw a great example of the numbers that Mike McDonald showed, the displacement of diesel in Atlanta Metro with UPS using CNG, LNG, RNG, upwards of 6.2 million gallons of diesel have been displaced. So to Patrick's point about not using other fossil fuels, but using what we're capturing right now is a great point. So thank you very much. There are no other questions. I think we'll wrap it up here. Appreciate everybody's comments, questions, participation, and it's early on a Friday afternoon, so I hope everybody rolls into the weekend and have plans to enjoy the beautiful weather we've got here, or wherever you're at. So with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody.
Hey, thank you very much.
Great job, Robin. Velvet, thank you.
No problem. You're welcome. It was a great presentation. You all did well. Wonderful. It went very smoothly.
It did. Good questions at the end. So thank you guys very much.
Bye, Denise. She didn't hear me. She's gone.
All right.
All right. Take care. You have a good one, Frank.
Thank you.